Speaker, I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to point out again that while my friend is correct, we have two different pieces of legislation under a single rule, and those legislations, my friend points out, are not particularly related to, as a matter of fact, they are not related to one another anyway. Each piece of legislation will receive a separate debate and a separate vote on the House floor. There was simply no reason to have two rules when one applies for two bills that basically need to come in the same format in our view. I also point out that when we're talking about the vote on under the Congressional Review Act, we're actually following a form prescribed in statute, and we're moving at a pace that the law dictates and that frankly is necessary in order to retain the privileged status of the legislation in the United States Senate. So nothing unusual here, other than we're actually being pretty productive in undoing a lot of rules that, frankly, we think were misguided and rushed in the final days of the last administration. My friends are free to disagree with that, but I think the issues are pretty clear and pretty easy to decide and don't require a great deal of amendments. On the Oklahoma-Texas issue, and that's something I know a little bit about since it affects my district, last year when we considered this legislation, we actually did have an amendment. It was my amendment, and my amendment probably made it unacceptable in the Senate. But I was indulged by my chairman of the Rules Committee, and for the very important reason that we actually make sure that the tribes have an opportunity to be at the table. In this case, they do. Mr. Thornberry has worked very hard, and so there's no dispute between the delegations in Oklahoma, the delegation of Texas, the interest of the various Indian tribes. Everybody agrees that we need a common set of information, a common survey that we can all trust to, frankly, work out the differences here that have multiplied over a century as the border has literally shifted. So that's the appropriate thing to do. We don't need a lot of amendments on that. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to encourage all members to support the rule. H.R. 428 is a fair and equitable solution which all interested parties have agreed upon and which can provide certainty and that many landowners have thought along the Oklahoma-Texas border. In addition, H.J.Res 40 does a regulation that should never have been made in the first place. By preventing implementation of this regulation, we can ensure that those actively looking for work are provided with support necessary to reach that goal. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to take a point of personal privilege. This last time my good friend and my staff member, Mr. Waskiewicz, will be on the floor with me. He's been with me for 6.5 years, and he's made a smart career move and is moving on to the Budget Committee, a more august position. But I've had the good fortune, as I know my friend have, and we all have, to have very many wonderful staff members over the year. I've never had a better staff member than Steve Waskiewicz, never had a better friend, never had a harder worker, never had anybody that was more selfless in putting the interests of our office and the constituents that we're privileged to represent ahead of all else. So I want to commend him and thank him publicly and on the record for his wonderful service. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question